Of all the Disney animated classics out there, I think this is the best one that you'll forget about 5 hours after watching it. It's hard to explain, but I feel like The Fox and the Hound is... it's a film with really good messages, nice music, and it's just a nice, good film. But, you know, a week after watching it, I forget that I watched it, you know? Which it means it can't be that great, right? Anyway, The Fox and the Hound was a great success for Disney in the early 80s. It was the 14th highest grossing film of 1981, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for animated films in the time, it was pretty good. And it was the most expensive animated film ever produced at that point, so it needed to pay off for Disney. If it was to be redone a la Lady and the Tramp on Disney Plus, then it would definitely need the right cast, because you don't fancy that it carries as much weight in name as something like Lady and the Tramp, and therefore people aren't going to check it out just because, oh, it's a live-action Fox and the Hound. A lot of younger people especially will say, what's that? So it would definitely need some big names attached in order to push it right to the top of the watch list for a lot of the Disney Plus subscribers. So we're going to try and cast it today. Oh, and thank you to Andrew Garrett for suggesting this one in the comments. First, you need Todd, or more specifically, you need 2 Todds, because a healthy chunk of this film takes place when they're kids. So you could, there's kind of an in-between stage, but they don't really talk during it in the animated film. So I'm not going to bother casting like teenage Todd and Copper. But we would definitely need young Todd, and then adult Todd. Todd has quite an unusual voice. It was a kind of older-timey voice acting used for him, and quite a nervy kid as well. Which contrasted quite heavily to Kurt Russell as Copper, who was a much newer wave of kind of voice actors. And in my mind, we kind of need someone, because I can't think who would pull off that older style voice nowadays, but I don't think you need to. What you could do instead is make him a much more beloved and memorable character by casting somebody like Chris Pine in the role. Oh, that's right. He took quite an understated, quiet lead in Jack Frost in Rise of the Guardians and turned him into an incredibly beloved character, to the point where if we cast him as Todd, then the furries will be crawling on their hands and knees and praying to Todd, because he made Jack Frost into a sex symbol, you know, without a doubt. And he would do the same here, because he's just got he's got the voice, man. He's got one hell of a voice. So then you need to cast the younger Todd, who is a bit more difficult to cast, because nobody sounds quite as sexy as Chris Pine as a teenager, and shouldn't. Anyway, I think Noah Jupe could be right for this role, because he's had a few roles lately, and it's kind of a trend emerging for him as maybe slightly more of that skinnier, quieter type lead, and I think I don't mind Todd still starting off that way as the quiet, nervy child, and then growing in confidence into the sexy Chris Pine leading man that we need later. Next, Copper is much more of an all-American character, not just because he was originally played by Kurt Russell, but because he's born into this world with Chief and Amos Slade around him, and he's this little, you know, Republican kid who wants to hunt and drink beer and watch football. I know he's a dog and he doesn't do any of those things, but that's the kind of image you conjure in your mind when you think of Copper. He's also... Let's not make any mistake about this. He's the villain, okay? Copper is the one, he was the childhood friend, and then he decides, no, you know what, I'm going to hunt you. I'm going to try and kill you. And then, when Chief gets injured trying to kill him, he swears like a blood oath against Todd. He's like, no, Todd, I'll get you now. And it's like, what the fuck did he do? He was running away because you were trying to kill him. So now you're swearing you're going to try and kill him because one of you got injured trying to kill him when you didn't even do anything? I'm very annoyed about this. I rewatched it recently and just kind of went, what the fuck? And Copper is a fucking asshole. Anyway. It's a kind of Ramesses, Prince of Egypt way, except Ramesses tried to keep everyone as slaves. Oh no, they tried to murder him, so I mean, it's much of a muchness, honestly. Don't think that whole redemption arc at the end makes me forget how quickly he was willing to just be like, no, I'm gonna murder my childhood friend. Anyway, I think the kind of equivalent, as near as I can think of, to a young Kurt Russell modern day, is somebody like Scott Eastwood. He's got that all-American style about him, you know, he's the scout boy, you know, he's Superman, except he's not. But I don't want to cast Henry Cavill. So, Scott Eastwood's had a few of these roles lately, even as Kurt Russell's protege in the Fast and Furious films, where he's as horrible as it is to say, he's the nearest thing we've had to like a replacement for the Paul Walker character, for Brian in those films, you know. And Brian was always the kind of scout boy, the good guy, white guy, you know, that's what he was. Except for the early films where he was like a rapper. What am I talking about Fast and Furious for? But Scott Eastwood's that good scout, you know, a Boy Scout type thing. So I think as Copper, perfect, you know. Young Copper in turn should be played by Jacob Tremblay. Before you complain and say, he's just that kid you cast in everything, because yes he is, I should say that he's the modern day equivalent of someone like Corey Feldman, who played the young Copper, and he was cast in everything in the 80s. So it's the same thing, and, you know, it's an easy enough role, isn't it? He's just this young kid walking about going, "Yeah, Todd, I love you," before the evil sets in, anyway. Next, Todd's lady friend, Vixie, who looks at him with those same fluttering fox eyes that made Marion give to Robin Hood. That's right, Disney loves recycling. And made 2 films in 10 years about foxes. Damn. Anyway, Vixie is only in the second half of the film, but she's important because she's got to essentially be so sexy that she makes Todd forget about his childhood woes and being left out in the forest alone by Widow Tweed. So, that's a lot of sexy. In my mind, the actor I always kind of fall in love with anytime I see her on screen immediately, which is what's got to happen here, even though it's just a fox, so you won't see her on screen, is Rachel McAdams. So that's where we're going for this, for sure. Also, Chris Pine and Rachel McAdams. That's one hell of a sexy pairing, even if they're foxes. Go away, furries. Next, Big Mama might well have the most lines in the film, now that I actually think about it. She's an owl who lives next to Widow Tweed and Amos Slade, and she not only saves Todd as a child when his mother is killed by a hunter. I wonder if Amos Slade was the hunter that killed it. Oh, she kind of guides Todd and Copper throughout their lives, sings all of the songs in the film, basically, and she's just great, okay? And she kind of acts as like a half narrator at times, and does all the singing, so she probably does have the most lines in the film. So I want Queen Latifah to play her. That woman is amazing. She's got the great voice. She finished off Hairspray on a high note, that film. That was fantastic. And she's done so many other roles where she's just this epic, sassy, wise woman. And that's what Big Mama is, you know. She's got a bit of sass. She's great at singing. She's wise. You know, she's just kind of all-knowing almost, you know, at times. So if you want Big Mama to still essentially have the most lines in the film, Queen Latifah. Next! Along with Big Mama, Dinky and Boomer are the other important kind of side animal characters. They're also birds. A lot of birds. A lot of birds in a film where the fox is the main lead and yet he doesn't try to eat anything, whatever. So, Dinky and Boomer are a great pair who've been trying to catch a caterpillar that lives in a local tree for a long time. Even though caterpillars are only caterpillars for like a month at most. We see seasons change, you know, it's like, it's there in winter, it's there again in summer again, in spring, it's always there. The caterpillar takes a full like year before it turns into a butterfly. It's like 2 to 5 weeks, I checked. Anyway, the comedy of those two makes me think a lot of Toy Story 4, where we had a stuffed chick and bunny pair that were so funny. And they were played by Key and Peele, who are just a generally magnificent comedic duo. And their turn in voice acting in Toy Story 4 was incredible. Brought a really kind of modern style of comedy to that. It was very fresh to see those kinds of characters popping up in a Toy Story film. It felt new. It would help The Fox and the Hound feel new as well, because it's quite an old style of story. Next. Chief is the other hunting dog that reluctantly takes Copper under his wing and teaches him to be the horrible, ruthless killing machine that we all hate. Somehow, we're meant to feel sorry for Chief at the end when he like breaks his leg trying to murder Todd. I don't know. It's quite hard to recast Chief because Pat Buttram, he was a famous voice actor with a really unique voice whose Disney credits also included the Sheriff of Nottingham from Robin Hood. It's a very unique voice, so it's quite hard to recast. But in my mind, I was just kind of like, well, you know what you could do instead? Just cast this kind of wise older guy who could, you know, be that kind of thing who turns out to be quite a villain. You know, if you wanted Copper to have more of a redeeming arc, you could have him questioning more Chief's advice. But he's being raised by Chief and Amos Slade, so you can't blame him too much, maybe? Anyway, I want to cast Kurt Russell as Chief because he played the original Copper, and he's also had roles recently where he's this father figure, talking Guardians of the Galaxy 2, who turns out to be like evil, you know, after being such a like Such a heartwarming father figure, you know, which is horrible, just ripped your heart. You know, it's Indiana Jones' Temple of Doom style, just claw your heart out when you find out he's evil, because you love Kurt Russell. And that's the kind of thing you might want to go for here, if you do want Copper to have more of a redeeming arc. If you just want Copper to be an out-and-out villain, you don't need Chief to be so diabolical and evil. But I think that could be a cool way to go.
Next.
Finally, we need the only actors who actually make this live action. We've just been casting what could be an animated remake up to this point, but Widow Tweed and Amos Slade are the humans at the well, not at the center of all this, but essentially, it's their fault that this all goes on. Widow Tweed saves Todd, and then Amos Slade tries to murder him, and then it's the whole thing. Widow Tweed is a class act, and a really nice sort of older, quite formal style of lady who loves raising foxes, apparently. Weird. Anyway, I want Viola Davis to play Widow Tweed because she's one hell of a chameleon, and she'll provide the kind of emotional powerhouse role that Widow Tweed was. You know, when you actually think about it, her like real, like, oh, the real ooh of the film was her like monologue about never saying goodbye and stuff like that, as she left Todd off and kind of gave him away and put him back in the forest. That is heart-wrenching. And with like Viola Davis doing that monologue, oh, the tears, oh, they'll flow. Plus, and I don't want to talk about race too much here, but you kind of got to in this situation, it's quite an old style of film. Amos Slade is, for lack of a better term, a dirty gun-toting Republican. Probably, you know, he's a Trump supporter, without question. And it's quite an interesting thing to me that even if Disney didn't really explore it much, because it's a Disney film, so how, you know, would they really want to? It'd be interesting for them to kind of make Widow Tweed black and just have that there. You know, he kind of generally seems to dislike her throughout the film. We don't see much reason why, except that she likes the fox and he does not. But it'd be interesting to have that as an extra facet of their relationship, which we don't really go into all that much. I'm just going to put it out there, Disney, if you'd be interested in that. Anyway, for Amos Slade himself, I saw a lot of people online when I was looking through who people had cast in this, casting Sam Elliott. And I was kind of like, well, yes, Sam Elliott could do it. He's got quite the look with the mustache and all of Amos Slade, but Amos Slade's quite an animated character. He is an animated character, but he's quite animated in style. He's all over the place, and he's... And it didn't feel quite right for Sam Elliott. To me, it felt much more like a Jeff Bridges style role. He's the epitome these days of this older guy who's kind of like and quite gruff about things. And I could just see it, you know. Amos Slade's just kind of this loner who lives out in the wilderness. He's like an older version of the Dude, you know, from Big Lebowski, that style. So Jeff Bridges could be perfect for this role. And, you know, I don't want to say it, but he's a crotchety old guy, you know. Amos Slade's a crotchety old guy. Jeff Bridges is perfect at playing the crotchety old guy, okay? He'd nail this role with its kind of slow burn, sort of redemption arc, you know? He's kind of still shady by the end, but he's kind of accepted Widow Tweed's help and, like, getting better and stuff, and you're kind of like, okay. And that's all for this fancast, folks. It was heavily requested in the comments, but now I'm at a loss again for which Disney fancast should be next. Don't worry, Roald Dahl fans, we've got another edition of our Roald Dahl fancasts next week. Please subscribe. Bye!